I'm going to make an executive decision and we're going to start. So if Apex does manage to make it in the next few minutes, we'll admit them. So we're going to start with Kumbukani, Nyirenda, who's based at the University of Pretoria. The name of the paper is Therapeutic Effect of Vimbuza, Healing Dance and Medicinal Practice, Plants on Mental Disorders Among the African Bantu Communities. So I'm going to mute myself, and you can unmute yourself and start your presentation, please.
Okay, I wanted to share my PowerPoint. To share my screen, how do I do it?
So Danielle, you don't have that one, is that correct?
No, I do not have.
Okay, so because you are a co-host, what you can do, there is a green share, there's a share screen icon at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, all right.
And then you press that button and it should allow you to select the window that you want to present. That should be your PowerPoint window. Exactly, beautiful.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. And my name is Kumbukani Nyirenda, and I just want to give a background of myself so that we should have some concept of what I'm going to present. I have a PhD in chemistry, and my work largely involves looking at medicinal plants in terms of treatment for various diseases. And in this regard, we collect some indigenous information pertaining to the plants that we want to use. And in this presentation that I have, I will look at the therapeutic effect of a healing dance that we have in the Bantu, among the Bantu communities, and also looking at the medicinal plants that are also used for the same. As a matter of introduction, we know that the World Health Organization estimates that about 5% of females in the world, they are prone to these diseases of mental health and also anxiety disorders. And also about 3% of men, they are also affected by that. And this problem is also very grave in Africa, particularly amongst female individuals. In the African context, about 6% of African women, they have these mental disorders, and this is higher than the global prevalence. And in Africa, this situation is exacerbated by factors such as infrastructure, lack of health infrastructure, and also the specialists dealing with the mental health problems. And as such, we find that historically, in Africa, we have resorted to unconventional procedures in terms of treatment of such kind of diseases. Therefore, we have looked at traditional or alternative medicines as an answer to these problems that are affecting the African population. However, we don't know the therapeutic effect and also the safety of these traditional methods. Therefore, our study sought to investigate the therapeutic effect of the two indigenous practices, that is Vimbuza dance, and also looking at the medicinal plants themselves. Therefore, the central questions that were resolved in this study were as follows. We wanted to seek to find out whether there are some social or cultural factors that contribute to these disorders amongst the Bantu communities. And also, we also looked at what sort of medicinal plants are commonly used for treatment of mental diseases and also mental disorders. Therefore, we looked at we conducted several systematic reviews involving peer-reviewed papers and also scholarly work, and we also had some PhD thesis which conformed to the particular information that we are also looking at. And we also conducted some stakeholder interviews, looking at the patients themselves and also looking at the caregivers. Then we also conducted ethnobotanical analysis of plants that are used for treatment of mental problems. And in terms of our results, we found out that amongst the communities, the Bantu communities that were selected, we found out that Vimbuza dance plays a critical role in management of mental health, particularly because of the fact that we have very little or very, in terms of access to medical care, that is very discouraging. And also, we found out that the patients themselves, they rely on the traditional practices just because of lack of units or facilities which could entail, which could give guidance to these medical personnel. We also looked at the perception of the therapeutic effects. In this case, we looked at the perception of the patients in terms how they look at the Vimbuza, and also how they look at medicinal plants in terms of the efficacy. So we looked at the number of patients who looked at Vimbuza dance. We found out that about a third of the population, they felt that Vimbuza dance or a combination of Vimbuza dance and herbs, they are more potent or they are more effective in terms of reducing the effect of mental health. And we also find out that some patients, they feel that the condition of that, the cause of the condition is more passes through one generation to the other. And also, we found out that in terms of looking at the components, we looked at the components of the therapeutic effect of the Vimbuza dance. We found out that there is some physicality that is involved in the Vimbuza dance. Therefore, we have other scholars who have put forward a thesis to the effect that they have associated physical activity to the benefits effect of the depression that people have. For example, if you look at how the Vimbuza dance is, you will find that unlike some traditional dances, the Vimbuza dance involves a lot of physical characteristics. And again, we have also a trance and also meditation that is involved in the Vimbuza. And we have some scientists who have reported that meditation has some relaxation effects for anxiety disorders. So these are some of the critical things that we have evaluated or we have identified from this. And we also looked at some of the medicinal plants that are used for treatment or for managing mental illnesses. And we identified 15 plants which were mentioned and identified by the National Herbarium and Botanical Gardens of Malawi, because most people were giving us in the traditional names, but we had to relate them to the scientific names. And out of the 15, we found out that there was a plant which had been investigated before. And this plant showed that it had some immunomodulators characteristics and also anti-stress molecules which were involved in the treatment of these mental health patients. Therefore, as a study, what is it that we can say that it is a take-home message from this study which we have? The take-home message that we have is that this study has established that there are 3 roles that Vimbuza dance played in terms of managing the mental health problems. That is the physicality, also the social acceptance, because if you look at the dance, most people in the communities, they look at these dancers as people who have a higher esteem. So in terms of the acceptability, the patients, they feel as if they are part of the society. And also, we look at some of the medicinal plants which are also used amongst the Bantu communities. And these medicinal properties, some of these medicinal plants have been identified that they have these stress-free compounds. And also, what we can look at is we identified a plant which is known as cinchona, and this plant is used as an antimalarial drug. So, because the cinchona is the one that it's a plant where quinine is derived from. So, is there any association between these plants to the mental health conditions that people suffer? These are the questions for the next, for the next study. Can we identify some association that is there? And also, we would also like to look at, because there's that kind of gender disparity between women and men in terms of the prevalence. Is there any social cultural or are there any social cultural factors that affect probably men or women more than men? Those are the issues that we should be unraveled in the next study. Therefore, I would like to thank Christine for, because Christine was the one who he did the research. He's from Norway. He did the research, a master's research in the same Vimbuza, and he provided me with some of the technical support. And also, I would like to thank the community, especially Dr. Mronga, the one who was dancing there, for sharing the indigenous knowledge and also facilitating the interviews with the communities. And lastly but not least, I would also like to thank the African Studies Association for sponsoring this presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. It looks like we have Apex, Apeh has arrived. Are you ready to present? Is that a yes?
I don't know how many minutes I presented.
What's that?
How long did I present? Was it?
You actually were under time. You were about 13 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So because we started, we wanted to start on time-ish. We missed our first presenter, who's Apex Apeh. I'm not sure if you want to proceed or if we should proceed to Clifford Gbasha. What's your preference? I don't know if you're muted. You are muted, actually.
The technical support I want to, it seems my screen is still shared.
you need to you want to unshare your screen? Is that what it is?
Yes.
I will just stop it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So. Okay, it sounds like I'm not going to be able to get Apex to unmute right now. So we're going to move on to Clifford Gbasha, who is going to be presenting a paper. It's the same, Medicine for Uncertain Futures, Interrogating the Efficacy of Faith Healing Among the Tiv of Central Nigeria. Thank you so much.
Hello. I will.
Yes, hello.
We will start with Clifford Gbasha. We will move on to Apex Apeh as the next person. Is that okay with you?
Yes, fine.
I am also asking Apex because it seems that we have a delay. All right, so we actually have the paper Medicine for Uncertain Futures, Interrogating the Efficacy of Faith Healing Among the Tiv.
No.
Okay. So, oh no. So I think we lost Clifford. So we have, but yet we still have the. Okay, so it seems that here's what we'll do. As we wait for Clifford to return, if Apex Apeh could please start. You said you're ready. You have your PowerPoint. Okay, we're having all kinds of technical.
I'm sorry about that. Please, can you share my screen?
Yeah.
Everything is now. I can't actually, but I think Danielle was doing it, actually. Okay, so it looks like we're back. We should probably try to have Clifford do this, and then we can figure out there's so many different technical issues going on with, I think it must be connection and screen sharing. So we'll go back to Clifford. We'll then move on to Apex. I'm sorry, Apex.
Yes, please.
So.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, you may.
Yeah. Thank everybody and thank my fellow panelists. This topic, Medicine for Uncertain Futures, Interrogating the Efficacy of Faith Healing Among the Tiv of Central Nigeria, is an extension of my PhD studies on health and healing in new religious movement among the Tiv. Now, this topic, despite advanced spiritual healing churches or despite advancement in medical healthcare, there is still patronage of faith healing, especially for mental health care, which is grossly understudied. Now, this project is a demonstration of the multiple approaches to mental general healthcare and justification for a more pragmatic collaboration among diverse practitioners. Please get into the next slide. Next slide, please. Introduction. Yeah, now faith healing ministries are becoming the epicenter of African medical tourism and the spiritual capital of African spirituality. Now they offer a new understanding against the monopoly of West models. They have continually impacted the spiritual experiences of African people in several ways, especially in mental health care delivery. Results from World Health Organization mental health consulting demonstrate that common mental disorders are highly prevalent in both developed and developing world. This study examines sociocultural factors beyond religious factors as how they influence the use of spiritual health care services among the team. Next slide. Invented by Johann Christian Real in 1808. I'm on next slide, please. Michel Foucault in his 20th century as a mistake of society to confine intelligence. In his thoughts throughout modern history, madness has meant isolation, repression, and exclusion. Now, which draws the attention of this course? As much as evidence shows that mental health has advanced beyond Foucault's imagination, especially in the West and developed nations, in Africa, mental health remains a spiritual demonic affliction, with mad people roaming the streets and markets. Many mental health seeking behavior in native African society, especially Nigeria, usually involves household decision, as the case might be. Unfortunately, efforts to raise awareness among primary health providers in Nigeria about the importance of treating mental illness have not progressed. More so, the exclusion and classification of mental health into lower medical cultural hierarchies has longer trajectory going back to the history, cosmology, and attitude of people to Western medicine. Next slide.
I'm wondering
Now,
if you
several
could,
accounts of
I'm sorry, I want to, there's some people having some trouble, difficulty hearing. So I'm wondering if you might also, yeah.
Yeah, I'll project. Now, the Tiv people are within the Middle Belt, Central Nigeria. There are about 7 million of them, and they are predominantly farmers, of course. Now, their worldview supports healing supernatural beings as causes of disease. The supernatural beings are supreme God, divinity, spiritual, ancestors, wizards, witches, natural forces. This constitutes the Tiv worldview. Now, the worldview of most sick persons in Africa are greatly shaped by the stories that have their sources from African healing shrines and faith clinics. Considering the importance of African healing, however, this perspective could be deadly in times of pandemics. Evidences may have grave consequences in the spread of infectious diseases, especially seen in the spread of COVID-19. Next slide. The Catholic priest emergence. Now I'm looking at the history. I'll just do a summary of the history of this emergence. The avian influenza in 1918, of course, introduced charismatic Pentecostal prophets in Nigeria. But this began in the 15th century, such as Kimpa Victor of the Antonia movement in Congo, the Nzile and Sinkana of Gosa Frontier in South Africa, Wadi Harris. In the West, healing preceded the birth of classical Pentecostals in 1906. Elizabeth Mix, Elizabeth Simpson, John Ariznadowi, and Pentecostal as a global phenomenon. Jonah Miller, Apeh, Adobemen, Borgias, and Van der Mars locate this growth within religious events at the beginning of the 20th century. Next slide. The Roman Catholic Church in 1967 and among the thieves in 1981. And since then, this charismatic belief has grown by leaps and bounds. Vatican II has given impetus to this phenomenon, of course, which is making way for the ordinary man on the streets, especially within thieves, where charismatic ministry has reshaped their understanding of medicine. Now, medicine for factors complicating healing. On next slide. It is important, therefore, to listen to those who have experienced this mental healing or families of those who have experienced this healing. In one of the scenes, I exemplified two scenes here. Scene one, which is on the next slide. Yes, next slide. John Ikume is delivered and healed from mental illness. No, up, next slide. Up. The previous slide. No, up, back. Yes. All right, now this is the second one on scene two, which a verbatim narrative of somebody who has experienced healing, mental healing from his daughter. My daughter was born mad, mental illness. I have been unable to go to get treatment from her, and so on and so forth. And only the man of God was able to heal. Next slide. For some whose stories have been documented here, in this work. Their stories present quite serious health challenges, which one will assume that only conventional medical help could handle. But fortunately, faith healers are beginning to treat such diseases, and of course, the extent to which this healing happens is difficult to verify. Now, on the next slide, you find a picture of persons who are chained. I classify this as violence of healing. These are mentally retarded people in 27. Now, there are several of them. There were close to about 20 or so in this place. All these trees have them chained to it. The next slide, please. This is a newly diagnosed psychiatric patient who has come to Father for healing. Now, on the next slide, I look at factors complicating this sort of mental healing despite conventional healthcare. One is economic background. Deprivation is a major reason why they patronize healing ministry for mental health care. Of course, if you're comfortable, you may not likely visit the spiritual home to go for cure. You would seek for psychiatric patient, but the lack of psychiatric hospitals also contributes. The second slide is perception of business. Now, closely related to economy, the patronage of faith healing is perception. What is the cause of mental illness? Most people among the thieves see mental illness, even in Africa, as spiritual, witchcraft, and such and such are the causal factors of mental illness. The next picture shows perception. Among the thieves, this is where every illness or sickness is designed. This was from one of the charismatic healing priests who had claimed that he had collected it from some witches and wizards. This is where HIV is designed. This is where mental illness is designed. This is where diabetes is designed and inflicted on people. The next factor on the next slide is education. Sociologists of religion have commonly discussed the effects of higher education in the context of liberalization, which suggests that it will suppress religious belief. But you see, within this context, perception takes charge, but advanced educated people who have money, who are financially capable, these factors link together for proper treatment. Or even if you cannot access, there's issue of access and access, you have no choice but to go to faith healing. Conclusion. Next slide. Despite changes occurring in the cosmology views of the world, they continue to place emphasis on the existence of supernatural world, which they believe exert great influence on the world of the living, especially with the thief. The complexities arising from the complaints about hospitals and the state of affairs makes one wonder how difficult it is to be categorical on the extent of medical interventions in the Catholic charismatic healing ministry in thief society, especially the efficacy of faith healing, which is complicated in Nigeria and beyond. This then one wonders what the future is for Africans, in faith healing. That's why I titled it Medicine for Uncertain Futures. Thank you.
Thank you. That was, you also came in under time. So even with the technical issues, we will talk about this stuff after. So the next, so as I was saying before, we were going to circle back to Apex Apeh. Are you still ready to go? It looked like we were having a little bit of technical difficulty with delay. So do you think?
I'm ready.
Okay, so I think your sound is a little bit delayed and choppy. So you might want to speak a bit
I'm
slowly.
ready.
Okay. Do you have your do you have a PowerPoint?
Let me. Okay. Okay. Feeling. Yeah.
So just so you No. Okay, you're scaring your sheep. So if you could, can you see if turning off your
Yes.
video will help your sound?
I have something my screen.
Yes, I see. Is it possible for you to make sure to turn off your video, and so we can see if it
Yes,
helps your
pretty much.
audio? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Whenever you're ready to proceed.
Some of them, the computers are to this type of work is traditional practice in Africa. The influx of Hausa, Herbalists, Igboland, in the
So you are breaking up currently, so it is very difficult to hear you. And it looks like he dropped off. So I think we're going to, and I think it might be a connectivity problem. So, and it may be the resource sharing problem with the screen sharing. So I'm wondering if Toyin, you could start your presentation. I know you're ready. We have Toyin Ajao, who's going to be speaking on Ubuntu of Wellbeing, a case of feminist Republic's unorthodox approach to healing justice in Africa.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to check that my generator is not interfering with what you're hearing. And let me know if you can hear me loudly. I have to put on my generator. They've taken electricity.
You sound great right now.
Okay, thanks. So, welcome everyone. Wholesome greetings to you. My topic has been slightly modified to Ubuntu of Wellbeing, the Feminist Republic's Afrocentric approach to healing justice in Africa. I struck out Unorthodox because it seems simplistic and it didn't really capture the essence of the work that the Feminist Republic is doing. So that's why that's happened. Moving on, today I will be next slide, please. Okay, so today I want to begin with a quotation from or by Salome Nakawesi. It says, "There is no question that the lives of women's human rights defenders are under threat. Ill health, insomnia, anger, and burnout are real and not a new phenomenon. What is new is that self-care, wellness, and healing justice have become more visible, and we are bold about it. What is new is the intentionality with which we approach our awareness as individuals and collectives." With that in mind, can I see the next slide, please? Okay, so the key development of these studies or presentation, which is just a fancy title for my content, will cover resurgence of indigenous wellness thinking in Afrofeminism, just to provide context background to this presentation. Then I'll move on later to unveiling Feminist Republic Wellbeing Organizing, Feminist Republic's COVID-19 virtual gatherings, the gatherings' effect on the participants, the uniqueness of the virtual gatherings, and I'll be ending with Feminist Republic's renewed African Renaissance, another fancy title for conclusion or takeaway. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, in providing context to this conversation, especially on the resurgence of well-being thinking through ancient praxis lens, The Women's Human Rights Defenders Platform, known as Feminist Republik, in their quest for healing justice, debunked the reductionist Western approach to mental and emotional health as mechanical, capitalist, and dispassionate to their lived experiences. As such, they commenced looking inward for decolonized healing approaches that are holistic. They discover a plethora of underexplored options within African healing methods, such as dancing, storytelling, drumming, and so forth. Other contemporary researchers like neuroscientist Richard Davidson, Emeritus of Medicine John Kabat-Zinn, social worker Brené Brown, and the late anthropologist Ronaldo Toro also corroborated ancient practices such as breathing exercises, meditations, dancing, and storytelling as effective in mind-body overarching wellness. So the Feminist Republik, therefore, intentionally stepped into decolonized wellness practices to address perennial burnout and mental breakdowns associated with age-long injustices, oppression, and systematic violence perpetrated against women. They set to work with a critical consciousness to decolonize, reclaim, and embrace ancient healing knowledge of their ancestry, which colonialism deemed primitive. Their interest were ignited and sparked in Ubuntu philosophy, which Afro-feminist Sylvia Tamale describes as an African traditional ideology of justice and fairness based on the philosophy of humanness, communitarianism, solidarity, and interdependence. Related concepts can be found in other cultures in Africa, such as Omoluabi, Pamoja, Umoja. And a critical example is the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai's work on ecofeminism through the Green Belt movements, where she deliberately and holistically got involved in the restoration of the ecosystem and humanity as interdependent entities. So finally, the Feminist Republik believed the mind, the body, and the spirit are interconnected for holistic nurturing. This is a backdrop to their indigenous wellness thinking and Afrocentric approach to healing justice in Africa. So you may want to ask me who or what is Feminist Republik? Next slide, please. Feminist Republik is an African women's human rights collective care platform launched in December 2019, an initiative of Urgent Action Fund Africa. It was established for holistic security, safety, well-being, and radical care practices, as well as knowledge generation for and by African women's human rights defenders through the lens of decolonization and Afrocentrism. Next slide. So with Feminist Republik Wellness Organizing, they began decolonizing healing knowledge and practice through different programs they are coming up with, and they are organizing collective care using Ubuntu philosophy, which I explained in my introduction earlier. And the third thing that they are doing, next slide please, is the prioritization of, next slide, of healing justice in Africa. Apeh states that healing justice is a way to holistically respond to and intervene on generational trauma and violence, and to bring collective practices that can impact and transform the consequences of oppression on our bodies, hearts, and minds. So the Feminist Republik's work is critical in this lens and is intentional in this regard. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. Now that leads to what the Feminist Republik did, which is what I am actually focusing on today in the presentation, an empirical event that happened in response to COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns, physical distancing, and all mental disturbances that occurred in that space. So they started providing, or the thought of providing, psychosocial support for the women's human rights defenders who are from everywhere in Africa. This is like a consortium of different organizations from different parts of Africa, covering all the regions in Africa, where they have other languages of conversations, including Arabic, French, in use. So they began thinking of what to do, and that's how the Ubuntu virtual gatherings started. This was a 6-week empirical event from 1st May to 5th June 2020, and it was a 2-hour per week event with an average of 50 African women's human rights defenders in attendance. I hosted this event as Moon Goddess, as my moniker in Healing Spaces. So the Ubuntu virtual gatherings covered the following events: Yemoja dance, Kujijua song therapy, Ubuntu healing circle, Gusha expressive writing, and holistic body scan. So let me quickly mention what those are, just in brief details. Next slide. So Yemoja dance name is derived from the water goddess in Yoruba spirituality. It signifies symbolic representation of life, energy, and fluidity in African cosmology. And we perform this through selections of contemporary African, Oriental, and Occidental music. The next event, next slide, please. Kujijua song therapy, with Kujijua meaning self-knowledge or self-awareness in Swahili. And the song therapy tapped into ancient therapeutic value of music and dance, because this is all about taking ancient knowledge and wisdom from Africa and put it into this kind of work we were doing. So the participants intentionally stepped into healing as a collective through their own song selections during the event. And that leads us to the next event I want to talk about. If I can have the next slide. Thank you. Ubuntu Healing Circle was designed as a virtual Zoom gathering. So we had a virtual circle of humanist and compassionate sharing of individual vulnerabilities happening within that space. And this enhanced a sense of belonging within the participants to navigate intersectional injustices and oppression through communal healing. And this Ubuntu Healing Circle encouraged empathy among participants as they echo, I hear you, I feel you, and I join my energy with yours in solidarity when intense stories were shared. So next event is Gusha expressive writing. Gusha expressive writing came to be with the concept of a soulful, co-sharing, affective writing session through storytelling, which is a predominant practice in ancient African culture, storytelling, oral stories and all of that, folklogs and everything else. So we use this as a cathartic channel, like I mentioned in the African society, to improve individual well-being as a collective and to bond. Gusha is derived from Ethiopian ancient social practice of feeding one another as a form of love and honor. The next one, please. The last event here is titled Holistic Body Scan, and it was a mindful exercise involving deep breathing and relaxation of the entire body and mind as practiced in Egyptian chematic spirituality. It's a psychosomatic detoxification exercise from all the intensities that we internalize in our bodies. So this particular scan allowed the individual to take charge of their own wellness interdependently. And this concludes the activities. Yes, next slide. And after the event, the evaluation from the participant as well as observations culminated into the effect of participant that I'm going to share, that the participant felt Ubuntunized. This is a fancy word from me to say. They said it engendered a sense of collective wellness, intentional solidarity, and radical form of self-care. And it helped them tap into experiential healing. You know, it's different from just talking about doing it, practicalizing. So they said it felt different, responsive, affective, and intuitive. And they found that space non-judgmental, inclusive, creative, and safe, where everybody is holding space for everyone else. So a few participants had direct quotations I am presenting to here. Can you go to the next slide? One says, I have been in a relatively strict lockdown for 3 months. Taking care of my mental health has been a challenge. The Ubuntu gathering has given me a space of community, introspection, and joy. I enjoyed the honest self-reflection that was encouraged. There was also a great mix of tears and laughter, writing and dancing, stillness and movement. The second participant says, next slide. I shared a song in one of the gatherings that summarized my challenges, fears, and life journey. I received a lot of support from the gathering when it was being played, and this was a turning point in my healing journey. I could feel the support from others. I could feel people trying to be in my shoes and sending out all their good energy. So with this, what the Feminist Republic did, yes, please, was to use this gathering to enhance well-being collectively as their intention has been. So the uniqueness of this gathering is on the wholesome and experiential healing that we brought to the fore, as well as the ability and the space to learn and share integrative healing tools that can be used in people's private lives, in their organizations, and all that. So it's re-engineered a sense of compassion and oneness, as well as belonging among the participants, that you are not alone in your struggle. However, there is a way to transmute this and holistically heal. And they found this responsive, intuitive, as an Afrocentric and Afrofeminist approach to mental and emotional well-being. Next slide. I hope I'm still within time. So this leads me to the takeaway and the conclusion of this presentation, whereby I titled this Feminist Republic's Renewed African Renaissance, in the sense of the work they're trying to do, is in the intentional way that they're occupying the space of ancient healing practices in Africa. So they are setting the pace for the reemergence of indigenous knowledge, production, and healing practice through Afro-modern approach. As you can see how we blended everything within the Ubuntu healing circle, Ubuntu gatherings. And they are promoting mental and emotional well-being as a political resistance and a radical form of healing justice. They are decolonizing and reclaiming holistic care once considered pseudoscience within the Western Orthodox treatment. So finally, they are institutionalizing experiential healing practices and knowledge for intergenerational well-being. So these are the kind of things that the Feminist Republic is working on at this point in time, and they are still taking this forward beyond the Ubuntu gatherings. They're having several programs as we speak. This month, they are doing Pamoja events to enhance the well-being within the community as healing unravels for the African women's human rights defenders. So thank you. This is my conclusion. Last slide, please. I'll be open to discussions, questions, and whatever you have for me later. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. I think we are joined again by Apex Apeh, and I wanted to see if he is ready for his presentation. We're gonna see if it works. Apex, you may want to unmute. I think there was some problem with connectivity. We can see if we can get sound, if you can unmute yourself, please. I'm hearing someone's keyboard. But I'm not hearing Apex, Apeh. So can you unmute?
I'm sorry, yes. Are you hearing me now?
I can, but it is very choppy.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, but it's very choppy and it sounds like there's also a delay.
Are you? Hello? How is it?
Your audio is very choppy,
Now?
and I believe it's very
Hello?
delayed.
Can you find? Hello? Oh.
We're having,
Hello?
I believe we're having, yes, I can hear you. Do you, there's someone saying, let's hear it even with the delay. I mean, we don't know if we can read the slides actually, because it depends on what the slides say. And it may be difficult to, so do you have slides to share? Okay, we lost him again. I think one of the issues is that we wouldn't be sure if we could see slides or if the slides if the slides would be necessarily visible or if they necessarily communicate the information that would be in the paper. So what I would like to suggest actually is that we could actually start the discussion. I'm not sure, it seems like he's dropping off and on, and we may not be able to actually actually hear what he's saying. So if people have questions about the three presentations, if we have questions about, I'm actually wondering if it made more sense for Apex to try a different method of coming into the room. Because he has dropped again, actually. And I think we're just back again. I do actually have his paper on file here, so that is also an option. But actually, I think what I would like to do, so Apex, are you here? Yes, obviously there are connectivity challenges. Yes. Yes.
Can I send that across now?
Can you send it? Hold 1 second. Danielle, do you have a copy of his presentation?
No, I do not.
And I don't either. What I do have is a paper, and I'm trying to find it now. actually not here.
Hello?
Yes. Have you sent your presentation?
I'm here again.
If you could type in the comment box or the chat box, that might be helpful because you're still breaking up.
Hello? I can. Okay.
So I'm asking Apex to send the presentation and also to communicate the position in the chat box so that we know whether he is able to send in his presentation. The paper is, because he's also dropped off again. So the paper is actually looking at the rise of the use of traditional medicines in Igboland and how this has attracted the influx of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani herbalists to Igboland. And so the research draws on interviews amongst Igbo patients that were treated by herbalists to figure out or ascertain why they chose traditional healers over Western Orthodox medical practitioners. Several herbalists, I think it says 50, there were 20 Yoruba, 20 Hausa Fulani, and 10 Igbo who were interviewed to understand why they found Igboland a good place to practice their trade. In the study, the author contends that there is a review of Igbo notion of traditional medicine, which has led to the increased patronage as people of various walks of life consult traditional medicine for various reasons. Some ailments were often believed to be resistant to Western treatments or Orthodox medicines. And so there was a need to complement each other, to use multiple modalities to provide healthcare. And so how that's done is actually the focus of this study. So it's one of the reasons that it was going to be focused here. I have not, so I could, that's the gist of the paper. One of the, I don't think he's back. So one of the things I was hoping that we could discuss, and hopefully there will be other people who have questions that they want to present to the panelists. But one of the things that I thought was, or a series of questions that I thought these papers addressed, was what does it mean to delineate? What are the cosmologies and worldviews that shape how communities name, classify, diagnose, and treat mental illness and psychological disorders, whether they are actually called that or considered those in the various communities being studied. So the big question for me was, what's at stake here in defining health, wellness, well-being, and healing in terms that rely on, I guess, Western or African epistemologies? How do these modalities help to delineate the boundaries of belonging? So I heard in the Feminist Republik discussion, I was curious about what forms of knowledge we are enlisted, which ones are perceived to be legitimate, and those kinds of questions. And how does that actually shape diagnosis and treatment? A lot of it sounded like Afrocentric and Pan-African diaspora thinking about health, healing, wellness.
Sorry to interrupt. I have AX's pre-recorded video. They just sent it to me.
Awesome, that's great.
Yes.
And so you're just going to play it?
Yes, I will.
Sounds great. So we will play pre-recorded video. How long is it?
It is 21 minutes.
Okay, that's perfect. I think even though we're a little bit behind.
The title of my paper is Traditional Medical Practices in Africa, the Influx of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani Herbalists to Igboland, Nigeria. It is important to examine this influx, and because of that, the objectives of the work is that examining the rise of use of traditional medicine with a special reference to the Nsukka cultural area of Igboland. It also aims at assessing the reasons for the influx of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani Herbalists to the Nsukka area of Igboland, as well as considering the need for more cooperation between traditional caregivers and medical doctors. However, the traditional healing systems have been criticized on the grounds that practitioners are illiterate, they do not understand the anatomy of a human being. The drugs and herbs administered do not pass through laboratory processes, so may still contain some harmful elements which can cause more harm than good in the body system. The practitioners do not adhere to the rule of hygiene, and the administration of herbal drugs may not be on the right dosages because they do not have the technology to determine drug dosage. This study is significant in the sense that despite the criticisms, traditional medicine has gained prominence even among the urban populace, which testifies to the inadequacies of modern medicine in bridging the healthcare gaps of Nigeria. As a result, there has been rising demand for traditional medicine among the Igbo. This demand emanates from the fact that people are now aware of the non-toxic nature of traditional medicine as against the use of allopathic medicine. Two, there are now the presence of foreign-oriented herbal drugs and nutrients. We have the DNLD, we have the Tianxin, all making inroads in every home in Igboland. And the Igbo began to consider, if these drugs are herbal and are being sold at exorbitant prices, why not they now try to make use of traditional medicine? Furthermore, there is paucity of medical personnel. We can understand in the last 2 decades we've been talking about brain drain, where medical doctors from Nigeria, from Africa, now move to Europe, Asia, and America to look for greener pastures. That notwithstanding, we are all aware that in Africa today, medical personnel are inadequate. There's again the low-cost effect on traditional medicine. It is cheap. Traditional medicine is cheap. It is readily available. It is acceptable among the people. Cheap in the sense that most of the traditional herbs are part of the local African menu. So eating is part of taking the drug. One is getting fed and one is as well getting treated of some certain ailment. Most of the herbs, like what we call the scent leaf, traditionally here in the Nsukka area, we refer to them as the ahunji. This ahunji, I will find the botanical name and insert. This ahunji is part of the local African menu, and it is used in curing ulcer. In course of my field work, I discovered one of my respondents told me that 7 leaves, fresh leaves of these scent leaves, taken every morning, first thing in the morning on empty stomach, every day for 7 days, no matter the level of ulcer one is suffering from, it gives it adequate treatment. I've tried this, I've done this, I've suffered from ulcer, I've tried this, and the result is super. Apart from this, there are why the moringa leaves and all this, the hospital too far, all form part of the African menu. But they are all very, very active in herbal treatment. There is again the problem of inadequate access to allopathic medicine. Obtaining medical treatment, modern medical treatment is costly, but one might as well ask, what is more costly than our health? Yes, it is costly, and to obtain it is very difficult because of the poor condition of most people in the society. Going for medical checks, going for surgery and all this, you first of all will resign. And that has become the reason why traditional medicine is regarded as what we call it, an appellate Medicare. Because when all chips are down and one cannot, as a matter of fact, afford allopathic medicine, one resigns to herbal drugs. There is again lack of effective treatment on certain elements, certain ailments like mental health, malaria, AIDS, and diabetes. We all know that mental health and treatment obtained from most psychiatric hospitals are inadequate. Then the case of malaria, which has been the greatest problem in Africa, health problem or challenge in Africa. Malaria has remained, and every now and then more new drugs are invented or produced for the cure of malaria, but we all know that traditional treatment of malaria had endured in Africa long before Western science came in here. And we know the drugs, the herbs that take care of malaria in Africa. Most of the time, after treatment with allopathic medicine, people resign to drinking herbal drugs. Cases like it, what remains here is for the African herbalists or the Hausa, Fulani or Igbo herbalists to understand how this system dissolves. And if you understand how this system, the problem with this system, they will be able to find the solution to them. Cases like diabetes, which is plaguing the rest of the world, can be attended to with herbal drugs. Then, as if these were not enough, there are cases which are spiritual. And that is the area where herbal medicine has taken precedence over allopathic medicine. Sicknesses, for the African sicknesses, do not just come. They come because of certain spiritual torments. And most of these spiritual torments, when they affect a human being, going to modern hospitals for treatment appears to be a waste of time. It is only through spiritual actions that these things can be gotten rid of. Now, apart from all this, despite the rising patronage of traditional medicine in Igboland, the preponderance of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani herbalists has not been interrogated, even as radio and television jingles, herbal trade fairs, billboards, newspaper advertisements, and clinics continue to dot the Igbo landscape. The herbalists were making good returns on investment, and that has sustained their businesses in Igboland. The study area, although centers in Africa, The focal area is in Nsukka Culture area of Igboland, which comprises 6 local government areas of Nsukka, Igbo Etiti, Igbo Eze North, Igbo Eze South, Udenu, and Ozowan. The areas belong to the Northern Igbo group of Southeast Nigeria. The research is embedded in historical narratives and phenomena. 50 Herbalists, 20 Yoruba, 20 Hausa Fulani, and 10 Igbo Herbalists, and 100 patients were interviewed in the 6 local government areas in Nsukka Cultural Area of the local government aforementioned. One wonders, has there not been herbalists in Igboland or in the Nsukka area before the advent of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani herbalists? Why is it that these Yoruba herbalists have taken the upper hand in traditional medical practices in the area? One of the reasons why the Yoruba are ahead of the rest is because of their aggressive advertisement. Radio, TV, newspaper, trade fairs are inundated with everywhere with Yoruba herbalists. They organize a system peculiar to the Chinese, Doctors Without Borders. They have their sales girls and sales boys move around the villages, asking people about their health, providing treatment. They move on the road. The girls with herbal medicine on top of their head, they will always drop this down and sell to a buyer. Malaria drugs, typhoid drugs, and all this are obtained cheap, 50 naira, 100 naira a glass cup. And it is very convenient for traders, for artisans, that you don't bother going to cook and prepare these medicines. You just collect a glass every morning. Some even order it that every day these girls and boys will pass through their shops and provide herbal treatment to them. They use traditional laboratories of divination as certain spiritual causes of ailments. They've engaged in modern packaging of their drugs and have gotten most of their drugs registered with NAFDAC. Then one wonders, yes, the Yoruba have tried doing all this. Why is the Igbo environment favored? What brought them to Igboland? What was the driving force? And one, it is difficult for the average Igbo person to separate traditional medicine from traditional religion. And really it is so, because often traditional medical practices and traditional religion appear to be Siamese twins. The religion makes one to believe in the efficacy of traditional medicine. Most Igbo people have been ashamed of patronizing traditional medical practices. And because of that, there have been gaps in between the Igbo past and their present. I had a friend whose father was a herbalist, but the young man was apathetic to practicing herbalism even after the father's death. Reason, he said, it is no longer the modern thing. I have continued to advise him to get back to it, try to find most of the drugs and use them. It is social treatment. Now, the Igbo haven't been cut off from their past, are beginning to realize their folly and the desire to go back for it. And because of that, they have found the Yoruba herbalists very helpful. And as such, the Yoruba herbalists have found the Igbo area as a land of opportunity. In Igbo land, there is abundance of flora and fauna to aid traditional herbalism. And there is rising patronage of traditional medicine in Igbo land, and the people have begun to see traditional medicine as a supra-tertiary healthcare for all and sundry. there is still need for cooperation between traditional medicine and modern medical practitioners. The government has to do a lot on this because they have to recognize the efforts of traditional medical practitioners in healthcare provision. There is again the need for traditional medicine to form medical practitioners to form an organization that does internal. It might be very difficult for them to regulate them. This government or the Ministry of Health should organize periodic retreats for both traditional medicine practitioners and modern Western medical practitioners to find solutions to new maladies. Furthermore, there is the need for the establishment of botanical gardens to preserve endangered plants. Why has traditional medical practice become resilient? It has become resilient, especially in our study area, because of the belief system. We all understand that nobody grows above his background. Really, no matter our training in Western science and having a Western upbringing, because we grew up here, we are born here, we know what traditional medical practices is and what it can offer. I was surprised in course of my field work within the university campus at Nsukka, where at a road junction I saw altars of sacrifices. This again informs us that we cannot grow above our background. Although as learned as some university dons, professors and workers in the university, you still have some of these things that I remember used to be adorned in most road junctions in the village. But I see here, herbs form part, have become resilient because herbs form part of our normal menu. We are not doing much by eating what we are supposed to eat, which, apart from satisfying our daily food needs, takes care of some medical disorders. There is rise in the number of ethnopharmacology dealers. This has to do with those providing ethnopharmacology apparatuses for Herbalists. There is again rising number of traditional medical practitioners. All these tend to portray the resilience of traditional medicine. There is mixture of traditional medicine with the local gene for the cure of malaria, the cure of typhoid, the cure of certain sexually transmitted infections. All these have become part of us. There is the presence of hawkers in around town made traditional medicine very convenient for use. And traditional medicine has become the appellate Medicare system. There is again, traditional medicine it forms part of our spiritual heritage and very important to our lives. Modernization of herbal drugs, as they can now be obtained as soap, cream, toothpaste, wine, etc., has made it very handy and friendly in use. Conclusively, traditional medical patronage has caused the use of modern methods of herbal preparation and perhaps herbal revolution in Nigeria. There has been a hybrid of herbal cultures among the Igbo with the influx of Yoruba and Hausa Fulani Herbalists. What is more, Yoruba Herbalists have shown the most presence in the study area. They are here with their modern offices adorning the Nsukka environment. There is need again for collaboration between traditional healers and medical doctors to find solutions to intractable diseases. There is no need for the medical doctors to look down on herbalists and perhaps desiring to understand how they practice their trade just by a visit to their herbal home. It's quite unfortunate that these things have led, this kind of relationship has led to the antagonism that exists between traditional healers and medical doctors in a situation where all of them are working for the provision of the healthcare needs of the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We are now ready to take questions. Oh, sorry, we're now ready to take. Thank you for that. We're now ready to take questions. Are there people who have questions? You can put them in the chat amongst the panelists. If you can also signal your desire to pose questions to people on the panel.
Sorry, Adia, I'm just thinking you asked us some questions before as well.
I did.
Want us to reflect on that?
Well, I was actually worried about time, but yeah, I mean, you could also reflect on those because it does look like we don't have any people with questions in the chat yet. Okay. And I don't know if it is helpful. Would it be helpful for me to repeat some of them?
I think I guess some of them, but I don't know about my colleagues. I got some of them, but I don't know about my. Yeah.
Right, I'm looking to see if anyone in the panel is agreeing with you or not. I don't see.
Yeah, me too. I got some of the questions that you asked. So if my colleague could start, maybe I can join later.
Okay.
To respond.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. I just find it fascinating the question you asked about cosmology in the world view. And I think you are talking about global understanding of mental health care or global understanding of holistic wellness. So if the cosmology is speaking to that, what's it called now? The understanding within different cultures, how to address mental health or emotional well-being. What I can say is it's being understood that we cannot take dualistic approach to mental health. It cannot be something as we've learned in the Western thinking that you treat the mind or you treat the emotion, that everything is interconnected. And sometimes with medication, it might be treating this symptom than the problem itself, because the person's holistic the person's psychological system, environmental conditions, as well as their own context might not be factored in what we are talking about. So the understanding is to go beyond treating that symptom to understanding the complex layers of mental and emotional well-being. And that was the reason why I spoke to contemporary researchers who are utilizing modern devices, scientific devices, to understand the effect of some of these what do I call it now? Ancient approach to holistic well-being. Like Richard Davidson actually used ECG and MRI to scan and see the effect of meditation in long-term resolution of mental and emotional illness on some of the practitioners. So I don't know if I captured that, but I want to move to the fascinating question about boundaries or within sense of belonging, because that can be a very tricky space where the other person's agency and right is disrespected. But what is happening is that within the African Women's Human Rights Defenders or Feminist Republic, they are putting forth the agency of an individual within the system that they are creating. That's why it is interconnected and interdependent way of looking at holistic well-being. It's not about essentializing nature of what we know, where harmful practices were encouraged. We know in some cultures we have widows practices that is dehumanizing to the person. We have female genital mutilation. And that's the reason why it's not really about the practice itself, but about the knowledge and the wisdom that they can tap into and use in the modern approach that they are embracing. Finally, on legitimacy, the Feminist Republic is not just practicing alone, they are getting engaged in research. So there is a lot of research going on to understand better, to utilize modern devices, to utilize to utilize logical thinking and critical thinking to actually interrogate some of these practices. But it's more about that knowledge itself, it's more about that wisdom itself, it's now about how it's being revolutionized and reapplied within the context of an individual in this modern time. Thank you.
So I'm wondering if there are others. One of the things that I was also I think trying to get at by raising some of these questions is that Western biomedicine is one typology, but even within sort of Western ideologies about mental health itself is I guess what I'm saying, a product of a particular set of knowledge practices. And so what I heard from all of these papers is that there are other ways of conceptualizing well-being, other ways of conceptualizing health that extend beyond a sort of mind-body dualism. Some of those are actually may even be considered Western or Occidental. So I guess some common threads that I heard across the paper was, and again, there's another kind of Western epistemology which understands these things, all of these issues as political and economic, right? So it's not simply a disorder of psychological, psychiatric, or neurological whatever, but that there are structural conditions, that there are political and economic conditions that shape a person's ability to seek out care, right? So some of you describe therapeutic itineraries. So it's not simply that a person is unwell and seeking care. What happens is they seek care in multiple places and understand the efficacy of various interventions in different ways. So okay. It's not simple, right? So
all right, Adia, I think I'll add a few things from what Toyin has already said and what you are talking about. Mm-hmm. Of course, in the African perspective, as Toyin said, indicated to say that normally when you work on mental health or any type of disease, we look at the holistic approach in addressing a particular issue. So there could be some physical identities or spiritual or social or even cultural and environmental. They all go into play when addressing such issues. And you also mentioned about, okay, we are trying to find out about the classification of the diagnosis in the African context. Of course, depending on the community that you are dealing with, you could classify them in, let's say, we have what we call bone setters, those who use bones to diagnose a particular disease, or you can have divination. There is also some form of herbalism in it. And also you'd have others who are specialized as spiritualists. So all that, they come into play when managing a particular disease in the African context. So apart from the mental or whatever body that you are dealing with, you also have all that into play when looking at disease management. Thank you. I don't know whether I've answered some of the aspects that you raised, especially when you talked about the diagnosis in the African context.
I see Clifford's hand. Clifford, I think you had raised your hand to speak to address the question.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I'd like to say that there is no unified system of treating mental cases in the world. The understanding of mental illness within African context and within the Western context is completely different. And unless we approach it with this multidimensional approach towards healing, there can never be solutions. One, on the issue of diagnosis. Most African context, especially where they just see you and assume by your symptoms or behavior and by narration of your family. Now, the family, like I said in some parts of my paper, the family members play a vital role in determining if somebody is mentally ill. They narrate the situation of the healer, and even the traditional healers, Western diagnosis is a mental illness. So sometimes, just like you mentioned, economic factors, somebody can be broke and poor and then decide to depress, and then they say it's mental. All he needs is just some little money and then he's fine. And then so on and so forth. For my project is a demonstration of the multiple appeal, faith healing, and scientific methods. The future is really uncertain. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Because when I was reading your paper, I was actually seeing resonances, and you even have what I would say some Western reference points that suggest commonalities across spaces, right? So in other words, if you go into a psychotherapeutic session say in Chicago, the person isn't going to just ask you about how you're feeling and trying to link those things up to a kind of neurological cause or a psychodynamic cause. They may actually ask you about your family. They might ask you about specific kinds of traumas, but the assumption is that that one's psychological health is linked to environmental, social, structural, blah, blah, blah. But the idea is there are these paradigms within biomedicine that will, I think, well, there are obviously a lot of different ways to think about it, but I'm just trying to pull out some of the typologies that many of you have elaborated, because I think each of you is pointing to specific modalities of thinking about what even is health, who is responsible, so what forms of agency people have basically for acknowledging, recognizing, if we want to call it diagnosis, for treating and for management. And so all of these are situated within a certain context, environmental. It's also why I was wondering Kumbukani about the typology of the Vimbuza dance. So is it something that you discover, or is it something that you start out knowing about and then want to explain in relation to how it's used, how it's instrumentalized by people, or what it actually looks like and does for people? How do they perceive it? How do they see it fitting into a range of options for redressing or addressing the concerns that they have, whatever that is? I saw those as separate or maybe related, but not central to some of the chemical questions. It made me wonder if Vimbuza is something bigger than, more important than, or complementary to medicinal plants, herbal remedies, family and community understanding of what is going on in a person's well-being. Because it seemed that you were looking at different etiologies. It looked like you were explaining having different origin points. It looked like you were talking about a wide range of concerns that people have, and this dance as having a means for it. It's one of many ways to address the concerns that people have about well-being in their community. So it kind of had a catch-all, but there was also this medicinal plants. So there are people, I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're looking at your data set, are you going to be looking at the overlap between, so people are using Vimbuza, they're using herbal, or they're using herbs alone?
All right, can I take that question?
You could, but it might be something just to think about as well as you're continuing your analysis.
Of course, I understand. I understand how you are indeed. It's like there is an interface between Vimbuza dance alone, and also we have a category where you use Vimbuza dance plus the herbal medicine, and also you have in certain circumstances where you only have to use herbal medicine. So there's that kind of interlinkages, and your question is very valid to say that I need to isolate those factors and I try to write more on each one of those so that I incorporate the complementarity of Vimbuza and also the medicinal plants. So it's not only one, but there are those different variations in terms of the use.
Yes, I did see that. I you know what, I will send those comments in writing because I have I have specific questions, because I think it's not simply that they're complementary, but actually that your aims in your study set them apart in different ways. And so I'm wondering if you might not necessarily resolve it, but think through what it is that Vimbuza dance is actually doing in your work itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and how that links up to all of these concerns that I think are very much so. I don't want you to be constrained by the what I think you're being constrained by, which is the question of mental health.
No.
The question of mental health, which is it's the constraint of the what I would say the Western biomedical model. You are constrained by it in ways that you don't want to be.
All right,
you know what?
Point taken. I'll look into that.
You're not being driven by your people, is what I'm saying. So,
okay.
You know what? I think we have run out of time because our person left. It always suggests to me that we have, and nobody put in any questions, but the next steps are this. Everyone has put their their peer review in folders. I will compile those and add my own comment, and you'll receive those, and that'll be part of the process. So that's how it's supposed to be, because I helped to select the abstracts. I'm not sure if anybody knows what I do. I didn't properly introduce myself. I'm an anthropologist at Northwestern University. I study and work on issues of health, and some of it's psychological health. And some of you cited my advisor from 15 years ago, Arthur Kleinman. And so I work on these issues as well, and the sort of anthropology of biomedicine and health. So I'll be sending comments from that perspective. I work on Afrocentric, Black, and West African health and healing. I see we were overrepresented by Nigeria today. So we'll just call it that. And so I'll be sending that information, I guess within the next few weeks. But if you have any questions, yeah, a little bit, just tiny bit,
a little bit, yeah,
a little tiny bit. So I will send those things. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to send me an email. But thank you so much for your contributions. I really enjoyed it. I apologize for any of the delays related to the technical stuff. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Good evening.